Welcome, and thank you all for joining. Today, First Service Residential presents Benchmark, the Guide to High-Rise Operating Costs and Budgets virtual panel. Please note that today's call is being recorded, and all attendees have entered in a listen-only mode to minimize background noise. There may be opportunity for questions at the end of today's call. Before we get started, if you could please just open up your Zoom chat panel by clicking the chat bubble icon at the bottom center of your screen. Throughout the entire call, you can please use the chat to send in questions by sending it to hosts and panelists. With that, I'll now go ahead and formally begin and turn the call over to Amy Sanchez. Please go ahead.
Thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our panel discussion on budget benchmarking for high-rise properties. We've gathered a panel of experts to discuss trends in high-rises and to share key budget information to support you in developing strategic budgets and long-term plans. With over 9,000 communities under management across North America, we have access to an incredible amount of annual budget information that no other company has. This puts us in a unique spot where we can offer valuable insights and analysis to help communities just like yours, whether you work with First Service Residential or not, build stronger, more strategic financial plans heading into the new year. Throughout this discussion, we will be referencing our 2025 High-Rise Benchmark Report. We will share a recording of this event and a copy of the report with all attendees via email. So don't worry and don't feel like you need to take notes. You'll get a copy of this information. With our benchmark report, you can compare your operating spend to other high-rise buildings in major markets and perhaps uncover areas of overspending or possibly underfunding. Now, it is important to know that when we refer to high-rises, generally speaking, we're talking about buildings that are 7 stories or taller. My name is Amy Sanchez, and I am the president of our high-rise division in North and Central Florida for First Service Residential's South region. I'm excited to be here today, and I get to serve as your moderator for this discussion. And joined alongside me, I have some incredible panelists who I believe are the best of the best in our high-rise industry. Starting first with Sean Ingraham, Senior Vice President in Vancouver. Thank you for joining, Sean.
Thanks for having me.
Great. Mark Kotler, President of our New Development Group in New York. Welcome, Mark.
Great to be here.
And Susan Ward-Freeman, President of Texas High Rise.
Good afternoon, everyone.
We've got an extensive agenda to cover today. So, team, let's go ahead and dive right in. I'd like to start by talking about what we're seeing on the horizon for major components of the budget for most of our high-rise communities, starting first with reserves. Now, many will recall the building collapse and the horrific tragedy that happened in Surfside, Florida back in 2021, which really shaped how the industry and legislative groups oversaw the long-term upkeep of high-rise buildings. We saw many states, as a result, change their legislative approach and oversight to enhance safety and ensure that a tragedy like that won't ever happen again. Living and residing in Florida, Florida happened to be the epicenter and the front runner of many of these changes, with several states such as New Jersey and Tennessee following suit. We've also seen, as a result, the reserve components really taking up a significant chunk of budget components for most of our high-rise buildings. DC, for example, spends about 28% is what we found in our benchmarking report. And what I would love to explore with our panelists today is really what you're seeing in your specific areas. Sean, I'd love to get started with you. What are you seeing in Vancouver and the greater area when it comes to what communities are setting aside for reserves and how they're approaching it?
Yeah, so we are seeing reserves come up, and I just want a quick shout out. I'm getting some messages. What happened to your face, Sean? I was walking my golden retriever on the weekend, and I took a branch in the face. So thanks for the concern. I'm okay. Yeah, so reserves are up in Canada right across the board. The biggest dramatic increase is in beautiful British Columbia, where we've had a legislative change in 2024, and it mandated that we had to contribute a minimum of 10% or an amount equivalent to 10% of our operating expenses. And so that's really starting to gain traction. We're seeing 12% contribution to reserves And even after expenditures, year over year, last year was 5%. This year, it's up to 9.8% in reserves. So that's great. It's a little painful now because people are having their condo fees or their strata fees go up, but it's really great for the health of the community in the long term. I think what's really important though is as these reserves grow, is how are you maximizing the return on them? So usually there's some controls or some legislation on how it can be invested, but you really do want to engage an expert to maybe ladder GICs so you've got liquidity and you're getting the best return. I know First Service Financial Inc., they do a fantastic job on this, getting great returns. So I just really encourage board members to go out there and see what they can do with these new reserves that are greater to maximize the return for the communities.
Sean, really great points. So it sounds like you're seeing ultimately communities starting to set aside more funds for reserve studies, which reserve action, which is terrific. Susan, take us to Texas, right? Bring us a little bit further south. What are you seeing when it comes to reserves and set-asides in the greater Texas area?
Yeah, and in DFW, we're really seeing an average of around 13%, right, dedicated to reserves. In our triangle market, which include Austin, Houston, San Antonio, it's really closer to 15%. I think like everyone across the country, the focus on the reserve studies in Texas was certainly amplified after the Champlain Towers collapse in 2021, but more so in our coastal markets. And although there are less legislative restrictions really in Texas compared to California, Florida, and Nevada, we know it's coming, right? There's certainly been a sudden shift in prioritizing asset management, structural integrity, preventative maintenance. Boards are really looking at this on a quarterly basis. They analyze their expenses and track equipment performance more than they ever have before. And there are several budgeting tools out there in the markets. As Sean was saying, I think boards need to, what are those tools to really track reserve study? That are living documents that really allow the boards to move large replacement costs based on the life of the equipment through preventative maintenance records, which are critical, and really almost provide a sandbox where the boards can move items depending on replacement priority of each one of those pieces of equipment. But preventative maintenance records produced by the on-site team are really essential for a realistic plan of action.
Great point, Susan. When I think about Texas, for the most part, I've always thought a little bit softer, a little bit more lenient, not heavily regulated, a bit more freedom to do what's needed. So what I heard from you is that we're seeing communities and leaders within communities really take action to start to pay attention to what they need to set aside. And that's some pretty healthy percentage of the budget that's getting set aside in the Dallas-Fort Worth area and the Triangle area, right? Mark, now I know when it comes to New York, smaller numbers that we're seeing there. Can you give us some insight into what you see in New York?
Sure. New York, historically, we've not had much regulation in terms of what needs to be set aside for reserves. And most of the pressure comes from lenders who want to ensure that there are reserves for Fannie and Freddie loans. But the rule of thumb used to be 2 to 3 months of common charges set aside in your reserves, but that's really not holding water anymore because there is a lot of pressure in the market to comply with what the lenders are asking for, even for jumbo loans, not just non-compliant loans. So we are seeing people going out and doing reserve studies, and that helps lower the amount that they need to put into reserves for that 30-year window. The reserve studies have been very successful in achieving that goal. Otherwise, we are shooting for 10% of operating costs in the budget, year over year. I'll tell you on the new development side, we are putting in, we're doing reserve studies, and we're making sure that we have a reserve line item in the budget to make sure that going forward, those buildings are set up for success in terms of reserves.
Yeah, I think when many of us think high rise, we naturally think of New York. And to know, according to the benchmarking report, that typically on average about 5% are setting aside funds for reserve, clearly there's room to grow and improve on that side of the business, right, for high rise properties. Generally speaking, benchmarking report, we saw a variation from 5, even in just Susan and Sean, what you shared, right, going up into the teens and into the 20s. On the other end of that spectrum, DC market, we saw reserves coming in around 28% of their financial plan sets aside money into reserve. So,
Amy, I'll also add to that there's different mindsets, right? Some boards don't want to have a large much money sitting in a bank account doing nothing, and they rather assess for it. But no, I think that the mindset is changing a little bit, based on these lenders saying, we want to see the money in the bank account.
Right. And then you've got additional tools like Sean was mentioning earlier, where you can play off of First Service Financial Inc. to be able to make insurance group to be able to set aside funds that you need to. So our finance team, right, to help find the right placement there. So great points, Mark. I'd love for us to move into insurance, which is another significant portion of budget for most of our communities, particularly in the South, where we see a lot of natural disasters. Things can really play into the volatility, not just natural disasters, but legislative changes. Florida went into specific challenges there where we saw, because of natural disasters, more insurance providers leaving the marketplace. So legislative reform had to evolve to bring players back into the space. So we've seen our own roller coaster of increased costs and now a bit of easing on insurance costs. And then, of course, localized claim history makes a difference for a property's insurance renewal policy. And there are other factors that come into play. I would love to talk with each of you, starting first, Mark, with you, on what are you seeing in terms of insurance costs and what should boards be planning to set aside?
Sure. The market in New York is very difficult right now. There's only a few carriers that are actually in the space, providing policies to co-ops and condos. It's very difficult to change carriers sometimes. And with that said, we are budgeting anywhere from 10 to 20% increases across the board in terms of increases. And I think probably the largest portion of that is the excess liability coverage. That market has really contracted, and we only see a few people being able to place the larger amounts, the 100 million, type of coverage. Much of the policies are much lower than that in terms of their coverage. So it's very difficult right now to place insurance. But I can tell you that First Service Financial has been an unbelievable partner in going to the market and getting great alternatives for our buildings. So we use them as a resource every day, and they, as I said, unbelievable partner.
Susan, in Texas, what are you seeing in terms of insurance? I understand deductibles seem to be a new challenge for your area.
So sure, like, many markets, the changes in climate have really driven premium increases. Over the past several years, Texas properties, especially in coastal and catastrophic areas, have experienced steep insurance rate hikes due to rising weather-related issues. But in Austin, Houston, and San Antonio, we're seeing insurance costs representing close to 13%. But with that said, signs of the market stabilization you can really start to feel it. So after many years of double-digit premium increases, many renewals with favorable loss history, so that's the key, right, are now seeing more moderate adjustments, indicating maybe a shift towards some rate normalizations. But for instance, in Dallas, we're seeing an average closer to 6%, right, and kind of folding down from those digits. Through First Service Insurance, and we talked about that, First Service Financial, we encourage board and homeowner educations on loss prevention. We bring them in to educate our associations on water leak detection systems, staff orientation and training on emergency procedures, environmental controls, preventative maintenance programs, as well as risk transparency. So when an association, has some open dialogue with their insurance company, and they provide clean documentation of building upgrades, safety systems that they've implemented, and mitigation efforts like water leak detection, and maybe even a roof baseline inspection and reinforcement, as well as flood controls. All these are increasingly viewed as lower risk insurers and can lead to better term or broader coverage or lower premiums. But yes, I think that water intrusion is the enemy in high rise. And we have seen some of those deductibles go from 10 or 25,000, up to $1 million.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a significant shift, right, Susan? So good to hear, though, that some of the cost increases that you're expecting are no longer pacing at that double-digit climb rate, right? Because it's not really long-term sustainable. Sean, it sounds like a slightly different temperature happening when it comes to insurance in your part of the world. What are you seeing?
Yeah, usually when we're saying insurance and benchmarking costs, all we're talking about is how much it's going to go up. But really good news in Canada, insurance is down right across the country. The market has softened after a really hard slug for the last 5 to 7 years in a hard market. And so what we're seeing is as the capacity for the insurance companies increases, more competition, on average, including an increase in appraisal in Vancouver, insurance is down 10%. And that's really significant for especially the Vancouver area because it's a high earthquake zone risk. And so that's 19% of the budget. So when we've got a 10% reduction on a line item that's 19% of the budget, really has a positive impact. So for once, I'm not talking about bad news with insurance. I would say though, Susan, you nailed it. You really want to have a story to tell your broker. Your insurance broker needs to go sell your property really to the insurance carriers. And so if you can create a story that talks about, oh, we've put in water leak detection, we've had an assessment on the envelope and the mechanical, it gives the broker a story to tell, and they're going to get you better rates. So I think that was a really good point you made there.
Indeed. Well, since we ended that on a positive note, let's talk about some more stuff that's really fun. And we tend to think of fun and amenities going together, right? What really drives the lifestyle heartbeat of a community. So it's truly the main reason why homeowners choose to buy into a community based off of the amenities and the lifestyle component. Particularly when it comes to fitness, wellness, food and beverage, resident events. The list can go on and on for why someone is attracted to a specific community. So I'd love, Susan, to get started with you around trends and amenities. What do today's high-rise residents really want, and how are boards really responding and preparing for answering the needs from the residents?
Thank you, Amy. Yeah, this is the fun part, right? So health and fitness continue to be the biggest resident drivers that we see in Texas. The importance of holistic, clean lifestyle, right? EV charging stations, cleaner air, water filtrations, waste management, recycling, even use of healthier materials during kind of common area renovations. We're seeing that not only in HOAs, but also in the multifamily side. Two of our properties in Dallas actually are well certified, which I believe creates, kind of a competitive edge. But residents are really requesting cutting edge fitness centers, including cold plunges, steam rooms, saunas. Admittedly, those sometimes are hard to maintain and require a significant amount of maintenance, but we've seen an increase in requests for personal trainers, juice bars instead of, or as well as coffee bars, unique fitness classes offered, right, both indoors and outdoors, wine cellars, creation rooms. Like we have one of our buildings that has sort of an arts and crafts room for gift wrapping. We have wood shops with a workbench and tools for residents. So they're looking for, organized gatherings that really encourage engagement and collaboration. And we find when we do that we really build a sense of community, better neighborly behavior, hopefully. And our general managers are really good at finding out like activities through their resident welcome orientation that drive sort of advanced inclusion and belonging, which may even include hybrid areas for remote and in-person work environment spaces. But one of our newest properties down in Houston, they featured built-in grills on oversized balconies off of every single unit. And in the common area, an outdoor entertainment center with strong focus really on landscape architecture. But mainly they want services that simplify their lives, right? Improve technology, elevated arrival departure experience through their valet, concierge that delivers packages, refrigeration for prepackaged food deliveries. And really, what are those perks that for a small fee, right? Maybe there's some optional quarterly floral or wine deliveries, personal chef experiences, but every building is trying to be more creative and one up their neighbor.
Indeed. Are you seeing, Mark, something similar happening in New York where people are getting really creative around amenity usage and what Susan just mentioned across Texas?
Well, Susan, you hit it. One-upping is the key here, and we call it in New York the amenity wars. All of our developers are trying to one-up each other and put something in that is the latest and greatest, and it's hard sometimes because the non-negotiables are the health and wellness, right? And the people want that gym. They want to have that beautiful facility that they can work out in, pool and everything that goes along with that. But we do have some developers that are thinking outside the box, and For example, we're opening a building, 520 Fifth Avenue, which is a brand new super tall high rise going up here in Midtown Manhattan. And they built a private club into this complex, and it's an office component to it as well as residential. But the club is really going to be something special. They're going to bring in an outside, star chef to run the food and beverage. It's going to be health and wellness, and they're going to have outside membership as well, which will help build, a kind of buzz around the place. But they're also building the first indoor pickleball court within a condominium. I think it's going to be the most expensive pickleball court in Manhattan. So we're looking forward to seeing how that plays out, but it's going to be fun. I'll add to what Susan said is it's sometimes when you build these amenities and they're not being used properly, they just sit there dormant. You have to program them. You have to have the right people to come in and make sure that they're being used properly, scheduled, creating events around them. The more use, the better it is for the building, the more value it brings to the community. So programming is key in my eye.
You talk about amenity wars, right? And being able to have something that's a little bit more strategically attractive than your next door neighbor. Well, I think an indoor pickleball court is definitely an added advantage for sure.
But I will add that the pet spa is still very important.
For sure. Everybody wants to make sure their furry friend is well taken care of.
Yes.
Yeah, we had something come into the chat that mentioned about pets too, and that seems to be a big thing, particularly for our Florida major markets. Sean, what are you seeing in Canada?
Yeah, so pets, you nailed it. Wellness and pets, that's where it's at. So we're existing amenities. We're not seeing a lot of renos or changes in them, but we are seeing a lot more competition in the condo market. And so the developers are looking for that competitive edge that puts them kind of ahead. But yeah, pets, dog runs, great dog washing stations. I was just in one in Kelowna called Aqua, had a fantastic dog wash station with like different heights for different dogs and storage and ramps. It was awesome. But yeah, real focus on pets. I think as more and more people are, especially if they bought pets during COVID, they're looking to take care of them. And so I just think any amenities with that, and then cold plunge pools, and again, anything focused on wellness, a nice fitness center, Tai Chi pavilions, calming water features, all those kind of things are really popular right now.
Yeah, to add to your point, Sean, the only thing that we see a lot of communities adding would be cold plunges. That seems to be like the newer addition because it doesn't take a ton to pivot to add that off of a spa to have that amenity addition. But when we think new developments and what we're seeing coming online, at least in the Florida area, it is all about the full health wellness perspective. How great is the fitness? And is there, Susan, you mentioned it earlier, a juice bar that serves healthy bites that homeowners can easily take advantage of. We see quite a bit of that happening. Well, amenities don't just happen on their own, and it usually takes the right staff to support that, which leads us right into staffing models, which really the on-site teams, Susan also mentioned it earlier when she talked about and the arrival and departure experience through valet. So staff includes everybody all the way through the building, all components. You can't possibly overestimate the importance of your on-site team and what it takes to not only attract, but then also to retain the right associates, and how that impacts the overall experience guests will have coming into the building. And so naturally with staff, there comes a cost associated with that, particularly in my neck of the woods in Florida. We've seen mandated minimum wage increases that have happened every single year, and that puts pressure on not only minimum wage associates, but those that are near that type of price point. And then, of course, if you want to attract the best talent, you need to pay the right market rate salaries. So Sean, I'd love to get started with you first on this. What are you seeing in terms of finding the right talent for your building? What do you see in your area?
Yeah, so there's a lot of focus on it, and you nailed it. It's because if you can have all these great amenities, but they're not activated, or it's not easy to get in them, or they're reserved and they're locked off because there isn't enough staff, it really is takes away from the building. So hiring the right people is key. Sometimes the boards are a little focused on cost over value, and that doesn't mean that your costs have to go up. But I would rather have 12 hours of fantastic concierge service than 16 hours of okay service, right? And so I think that you can make choices and find the right talent by creating a welcoming environment for the staff, and that also helps with retaining them. It's not all about pay. You know, how is the board recognizing the staff? How are they taking care of them? What's the benefit package? Is there days off? You know, is there bonus things for them? I find, especially with the younger generation, it's not all about pay. It's about the whole package, and I think we just got to focus on that. We're lucky enough to be one of the best employers, or ranked as the best employer, so I think that goes a long way when people are trying to choose who they want to work with. But yeah, I really think that we need to look at the whole package and creating the best value overall.
That's a good point, especially when it comes to retention, right? Susan, what do you see in your area in terms of what boards should be doing to retain talent?
Yeah, I mean, it is really important that you're competitive. So our HR team conducts 2 to 3 wage analysis every year, which includes condominium associations, multifamily properties, hotel, hospitality industry. And we review that with the boards to make certain that we really are being fair and consistent with what we are paying our associates to really ensure peak performance and retention. So we also discussed the collection and distribution of the holiday fund. You know, a lot of our buildings wait until the end of the year to really recognize the staff. And some properties actually budget the holiday fund so that all the residents participate and the funds are distributed equally, right? And by tenure, performance, maybe the hours that they worked in that calendar year. But some of our buildings, we've actually created almost a, matrix so that the distribution of those funds, again, are fair and consistent. Some of our associations will actually earmark a portion of that, maybe 30% of that, and they budget sort of a mid-year bonus so that the associate doesn't have to wait the full year. But last but not least, I think recognition and training, and you brought it up, Sean, just, how are we making our staff feel? So in order to retain really good staff, it's important to invest in the growth of that associate, enable them promotability opportunities. So First Service Residential has several levels of online and in-person development training that really touch on community manager training, career path development, and, leadership skills.
All great points. And what's interesting is that when we talk about this, you did talk about wages, which really do take a chunk. When you look at the Texas area and the major markets and the benchmarking report, you can see you're into the 30% of total operating costs are going towards the right staff, which means that this is a major component of your budget. Conversely, when we get over to New York, property teams aren't there, and there's a specific reason for that. Mark, can you tell us what you're seeing in terms of staffing and why possibly the property teams don't take up a major component of that?
Sure. Well, in New York, the majority of our buildings are unionized, and they're employed. The employees are employees of the building itself, and the union contract, which is actually expiring in April of 26, is going to be renegotiated. No, typically we're seeing 3% on wages increases year over year. But the benefits are also going to be negotiated as well, and we don't know where that's going to play out. But no, so we have most of our buildings are on that union contract. The ones that are not usually pay prevailing wages and benefits, but the hourly rates are very high compared to the rest of the country and Canada, and that's just a function of being in New York City with the higher prices. But I will say that to retain good staff in these buildings, even staff that has been in the building for say plus 30 years, you want to make sure that they are looked at for bonuses as well, but also that you're investing in them, investing in how they operate so they can do their jobs better. And for example, using like a hospitality trainer, which we have here in New York, which goes out to the buildings and will go and train the staff of the buildings in hotel type service delivery. And we find that some of them are really resistant to it at the beginning, but once they get into the training, they realize that this is a benefit to them, that they're going to be able to do their jobs better. Maybe they'll get tipped better by the staff, by the residents of the building. But they're at the end of the day, they're like, thank you for this training. Thank you for making it easier for do my job better.
Mm-hmm. I appreciate the explanation, and I do need to make a quick correction. Property teams make up between 19 and 27% of total spend, depending on co-op versus condominium in the New York market.
Yes.
But I appreciate that differentiator about unionization and how that impacts your financial planning. Another major component that I would love for us to chat about is utilities. So utility costs vary widely depending on location. Some markets have got competition, so multiple utility providers in one area, while others have just one provider that you can utilize. Mark, what are you seeing in terms of utilities in your market?
Utilities are a huge part of our budgets. No, sometimes could be a quarter of the operating cost of the building. New York has electric, gas, water, and steam. Steam is generated by the making of electricity in New York City. So it's another component that we have to throw into the mix. And it's a volatile market, but we use FirstService Energy as a resource in New York City to help us, guide us through the process of budgeting what the increase is going to be every year, or possibly locking in rates, which is very helpful for our buildings to know year over year. Maybe they'll lock in for 2 years and see what their electric costs are going to be going forward. And that's on electric and gas, procurement and locking in. So FirstService Energy has been a great partner in that respect because the market is always so volatile.
John, what about utilities in your area? How does that work?
So, Canada, we're blessed with a lot of energy and a lot of water. So we only see moderate energy cost increases, and think Ontario is going to see a minor dip in gas, which is awesome. But in Vancouver, we have a lot of green technology. So we got very sophisticated heating and cooling systems, hydronic, geothermal, district energy. And so really our focus is on how do we keep those systems running as efficiently as possible. And that's our main way we keep our energy costs in check. And I think it's just really important that these systems are maintained. The other thing we always look at is set points. How hot are your hallways? We had one client in North Vancouver. They turned their hallway temperature from 23 Celsius down to 21 Celsius. For you American friends, that's 73 Fahrenheit to 70, I think, right around 70. And they saved $50,000 in a year, right? Just by turning down the hallway to what I would think is a pretty normal temperature. No comments from the residents. It's over 300 units. But I just think that that's one thing that we're trying to educate our boards on, our councils on, is what is your set point of your hot water? What is your set point of your hallways? Because that's one area you can really save a lot of money on.
You answered my question, Sean. It was going to be, how did residents respond to that? It's noteworthy that you didn't get a lot of chatter out of that, right? So it really does make importance to just simply ask the question and start to see if you can tinker with those things.
Yeah.
Susan, what about you?
So ERCOT is really the biggest player in Texas. It serves about 90% of the state of Texas. And most boards in Texas market are likely to see a significant increase in the electricity costs compared to previously executed contracts. Maybe 10 to 13% of their budget are dedicated to utilities. And this is due to most associations coming off long contracts that were likely signed at historic lows. So between 2017 and 2020, those were the years that were really low. And some customers executed 10-year contracts, and now they're having to renew. So they're seeing quite a bit of an increase. So ERCOT is over 45% natural gas power plants and almost 40% wind solar. So wind solar is kind of an intermittent generation, right? And has caused frequent price volatility in the last few years. However, the good news is that the grid performed really well this summer. And with the help of battery storage, and price remained really tame. It's estimated that over 70% of our customers in these deregulated markets like Texas now work with a broker or consultant to negotiate and manage their competitive energy contracts, which we've all said, right, that we love working with FirstService Energy. They're a great partner to explore and really help our associations out.
Amy, I'll also add that in New York, it's interesting, but because of the energy regulation, Local Law 97, all new buildings, above a certain square footage need to be 100% electric. So they're eliminating gas altogether, which is, first of all, the market can't handle really any more gas being added to it. So it's helpful to go electric, but it's also gonna change the way buildings are being built.
For sure.
We're
it's
seeing the same thing. Sorry, Sue. Sorry, Amy. We're seeing the same thing in Vancouver. So we're going to phase out, the city's going to phase out gas entirely and just focus on electric, which is great for the environment. There is an additional cost though, because it's just not as inexpensive as natural gas. Sorry.
Sean and Mark, are you seeing that impact development in the area? Or do you expect it to?
It really hasn't affected, the pace of development. It's just changing the way buildings are being designed. Now sometimes for these HVAC systems, for heating and cooling, you need to have more area to house these units versus, one boiler system.
Mm-hmm. We had something come through on the chat that I think I saw briefly that mentioned about solar panels and buildings. We haven't seen a huge push for high-rise buildings to leverage that because there's just not a lot of landscape. But our utility providers, particularly here in the Sunshine State, have leveraged adding solar panels to their arsenal to be able to help balance utility poles on the grid itself. So we've seen that happen, but not a lot of high-rise buildings taking advantage of that, just to geography, right?
Yeah, we have one new building that we're working on. It's actually in construction right now, which will have a solar component. But I would say that it's few and far between that you have solar panels on New York City buildings.
Yeah, and for developers, the return isn't really there to invest in significant solar array. However, in rental buildings, we are seeing more interest in solar because it will obviously help in the long run cost-wise.
I do think regulation will change, or it has changed, to require some solar to be installed in buildings going forward.
All fascinating. And what's also fascinating is just simply the volatility from market to market. As we take a look at the benchmarking guide, which again, for anybody who's listening in, it is live today. So you'll be getting access to it. An email will come out with a copy. So you'll be able to dig into the report yourself following this call. But what was really interesting as you start to go through it is the volatility or the differences between markets and what utility costs are. It really does impact the overall cost for the association and the building management. We've talked about several of the major cost components of operating a building, everything from reserves all the way through utilities and staffing. What about revenue generating strategies, right? We all know that there's two parts of this budget. Typically, associations are zero balance budgets, but there is the revenue component that we always like to keep our eye on and spot any type of trends that we can take advantage of to ease costs for homeowners. I'd like to hear a little bit from the team, Mark, if you can get us started on where or how you and your teams leverage any type of revenue generation to offset expenses for your homeowners.
Sure. As we said earlier, we are using reserve funds, for these capital projects, but it's always, good to try to offset, some of those reserves by generating income in different ways. And some of our buildings have instituted, flip taxes or transfer taxes or transfer fees upon closing of a unit. And so when people close, they have to contribute a certain amount. Sometimes it's a percentage of the purchase price towards the reserves of the building. That's not as many as you think, but it is definitely something that boards are trying to get approved, but you do need a supermajority in most of the buildings to get that passed. So it's not easy to get your unit owners all to agree to that. Another way is we have a connectivity program for service residential that, in New York, it's a Spectrum. And, in terms of, bulk internet service for your buildings and cable, and sometimes it's also just being part of a marketing program. These programs have built-in revenue that gets paid back to the building, which has been very beneficial to our buildings. It's almost found money. So if you're if you're in a regional company that has this, I recommend you look into it.
Yeah, it generates real dollar and cents per door for communities to consider. Susan, Sean, anything you all would like to jump in on that for?
Oh, sorry, Susan, you go for it.
So I would, like Mark said, in Texas, many of our, almost 90% of our high rises do the 2 months assessments toward capital improvements or reserve fund at closing. But there are two other areas, right? In Texas, with the residential consumption of electricity, natural gas, and water, there is the state law that allows customers who incorrectly have been paid or been paying state sales tax that they obtain a refund. They can go back to 48 months from present day. So it's really good for the associations just to like double check that. we just completed a rebate for one of our properties down in Texas, and it was pretty significant. The second is our leading, cable internet providers that Mark really spoke about for First Service Residential Associations. And I can give you two examples because it is significant, right? So we have one building, it's 341 units, and they reduced their contract rate, not by a whole lot, but they did add 4 common areas, and they went from 86 channels to 140 channels. And the rebate to that association was $44,000. So that's a $31 per unit to the association that goes back to them, and obviously they threw that into the reserve. Another property similar, 93 units. They saved a little bit on the per unit cost, and over a period of time, they'll save $2,000 over a 2-year period, and the receiving signing bonus was a little over $12,000. So it's definitely worth looking into those particular 2 items.
That's great.
Yeah, in Canada, we're seeing more metering of utilities and water so that the strata corp or the condo can recover those costs. And then we're just seeing a real focus on user pay. So maybe you've got an elaborate amenity, maybe you've got a Manhattan pickleball court. There'd be a small user fee to use that, and then that way those people that use it pay for the maintenance and contribute to the overall budget. But when those that don't have to bear that burden.
We did have a chat that came in that was talking about capital improvements. And so I have a question for you all. Just skip us back to expenses for a minute. What are you all seeing? And Mark, I'll start with you in New York. What are you seeing when it comes to capital improvement projects and being able to remain marketable and competitive?
Well, I put it on 2 different buckets. You have the compliance side of it, which is, for example, in New York, we have Local Law 11, which is the facade programs. Every 5 years, you have to have your facade inspected for any building over 6 stories by a certified architect or engineer. And that typically will lead to some repairs that have to be done to the facade. But I can tell you that just getting scaffolding on the building and the engineer and the contractor, you're talking a few $100,000 just for the inspection before you even touch one brick. So these repairs are always very expensive. And also, we have a lot of regulation around energy right now, Local Law 97. So we have major projects coming down road some of our buildings in terms of changing out some of their systems in order to be compliant with those new laws. The other bucket is curb appeal. Some of the older buildings, steady state buildings, want to keep up with the new developments. So they need to renovate their hallways and their lobbies and their elevators. So it's really focusing on creating a better environment, more modern environment to make sure you can keep up with other buildings in the area. These projects are all very expensive, from just doing a basic hallway to lobby to probably $250,000 per elevator in New York City. With that said, you need to have the money in reserves for it, or we've been using First Service Financial as a partner as well in terms of creating loan programs for these projects, and that's been very successful.
Yeah, certainly with 5% being set aside for reserves in your area, it would need to pull into some type of a lending program to make that happen.
Yeah.
Susan, did you have more to add on to from a capital improvement project?
Yeah, I'll just say that, high-rise properties are reaching the age that facade and balcony inspections and repairs are really becoming critical. Repiping, roof repairs due to wind and hail, especially in this area, elevator modernization, life safety systems, access control, pool and deck resurfacing. All these things are, items that need to be in that reserve study. And sometimes when we take over older properties, we see significant trend of boards not even knowing or understanding the impact the low or insufficient reserves have been to their community. And really most are underfunded and not prepared to address failing equipment, right, due to the age. And so we encourage boards to really keep an action item list of capital improvements to turn over to new board representatives. Every time a new board member joins, there's sort of this reintroduction. And it's important that we review that in our board orientations or even a turnover workshop where old board turns over to new. And as Mark mentioned, First Service Financial really can provide great assistance to many of our communities with cash management plans and loans that really seamlessly support that reserve study.
Someone had mentioned in the chat that they've got an older building, and that roughly they're going to move their reserves into about 38% of their total costs because they haven't done some of the preventative maintenance or proactive capital improvement projects that were necessary for the building. So they're seeing it now take up a significant portion of their budget. And would that be normal or customary? And the answer would be yes. If you have a lot of deferred actions that need to be taken, that you're going to see reserves take up a more significant portion of your total costs. And when you're leaning into the benchmarking guide, you're going to see really averaged out numbers, right? So some of the unique situations will put you either on the lower end of that spectrum if you've been really, really great and proactive long term, or it might put you on the other end of that spectrum. So it will be important for people to keep that in mind as you're leveraging the benchmark to compare against your specific community. Sean, I did want to give you a chance if you've got more that you'd like to add for your market when it comes to capital improvement projects.
In Vancouver, we're fairly disciplined with envelope work. A few decades ago, we had a bit of a crisis in the leaky condo, so that shadow is still over the city. So we're all very disciplined at making sure we're taking care of the envelope. So we don't have a lot of that. I would say Mark is correct. The costs are continuing to go up on it, and so if you aren't saving and we're not seeing those reserves, then there's going to be a lot of special levies. One point, this is a little. I don't know. I'm passionate about this. When a board goes out and gets a reserve study, it's fantastic. It's a great document, but a lot of times they're very technical. And so I always love to see in the scope, it added that the reserve writer is going to attend a board meeting, even virtual or in person, and explain the reserve plan study, because then you've got the professional updating the board. And I think it should be done every year. But I always see that being missed. Sometimes the board gets it done and the big check mark, oh, we did it, and they never look at it again, right? So I think it's really important to incorporate that you're looking at it on a regular basis, and also that you have the writer provide an update in person.
Sean, that goes right to the communication aspect, right? So we've talked about significant portions of the budget itself, and you just mentioned how important it is for a board or a leader in the community to share what's going on in reserve, and generally speaking, likely significant communications around the budget overall. Do you have any specific tips or tricks or procedures that you recommend that boards that are listening into now follow when it comes to communication to their homeowners?
Yeah, for sure. So I'm a big fan of town halls. I think if a budget is increasing more than a single digit, so you're 10%, 11%, 12%, you have to have a town hall. It's because at the general meeting is not the time to educate the owners on how to vote and what to do. The time to listen to them and answer their questions is before that meeting. And then because sometimes they might have very valid thoughts or reasons, and then you're able to incorporate that into the budget before it's sent out for approval. And so I just really think that having a town hall is a big thing. And just a shout out on communication, we've got HODA running now, and it is being an absolute game changer because it frees up our team to do more of that interaction and more of that explaining, instead of having to answer those, what's my account balance, when it can easily be answered.
Yeah, HODA's been a huge advantage, right, for homeowners. We're getting a lot of great chatter to be able to get information at their fingertips. So, Sean, great reminder. Susan, any additional tips or tricks when it comes to communication?
Yeah, no, I'm right there with Sean. Town halls, we do them a lot, especially this time of year when we're working on the budget. We do budget workshops with our boards. And, really for them to be able to go out and educate its members on why reserves need funding or extra funding for operating expenses, and really explain the need to keep up with inflation and other factors that impact those future costs of repairs, replacement. But bring in the SMEs, like Sean said. We have someone on our team that's a reserve study specialist, and through Smart Property is able to really be in front of every single board on a very frequent basis to really evaluate and communicate exactly where those monies are going.
That's great. Mark, anything you'd like to add there?
Sure. I just want to say that having the benchmark report is an unbelievable tool to have to use, one for our managers as well as for our boards. It's a great way to educate them of what we're seeing across the country and in their region. It's very powerful information, and we should use it. But I think that there's so much pressure within our communities to keep the operating costs low. And sometimes that pressure is overwhelming. But we have to be really strong as managers and as their trusted advisors to make sure that we're being honest with our boards, and then they're being honest with their residents. Because if we are keeping common charges low artificially, it's going to create a problem in the future. If we don't put in the proper increase this year, next year's increase is going to be double, and that's when it's going to really hit the fan, and our residents are going to be upset that they have a large common charge increase. And also, if you are not doing an accurate increase year over year, you're not going to have enough money to pay your bills every month. So it's so important to have that honest conversation with our boards.
Mark, you raise a great point. And actually it ties to something that Lynette just asked. She asked if we could cover the overall report's findings on assessment increases by a percentage. And I'll share that the answer would be when you get a chance to take a look at the report, you'll be able to make some determinations based off of your market specific sub area. That's where the real value is. And then when you take that and you compare it against a specific community, you can now start to see where you fall into the line in terms of costs and overall, right? Where there might be some opportunities if it's not a unique reason why you're seeing overages or potentially some savings, right? So not an overall trend other than costs continue to move as one would expect each year, but the real trends happen in the specific submarkets. We did have another piece that I think I noticed, and then I'd ask Ben, who is going to help me keep track of true questions that are coming in, because we do have a little bit of time to dig in deeper, and I might have missed some as they came in. But I did see something where someone had mentioned HODA. What exactly is that? If we could, she referenced that we just mentioned it, but what is it specifically that she's not familiar with what it is? Would anybody on the team like to answer what HODA is?
I can take it. HODA is AI, and so it's homeowner digital assistant. And really what it is, it's a plugin. So you can go and you can ask some basic questions. It's not going to, rewrite something for you or anything, but it's going to be able to answer most of the common questions. In fact, I think the resolve rate is like 90%. So 90% of the time people are getting an answer and then they're happy with that answer and they're moving on. And if not, there's an escalation process and you can get your answer. It just won't be as quick because the AI is so fast, but it's just great. It really reads a lot of your documents for that community, and it's held private. And I'm a big fan of it because it takes away those little questions. If you're at midnight and you're saying, oh, you got a quick question for it, you can ask it, and you don't have to have the staff waste their time on that because you can get the answer right away.
I'll add that I was speaking to someone, they said that someone tried to break it. They were trying to ask trick questions of it, and HODA kept on getting the answers right. So that's great.
My team, we had a break team. Can we break HODA before it launched? And we tried everything to do it. It's pretty good. It's pretty good.
That's awesome. Ben, were you able to capture any additional questions that I might have missed coming through the chat?
Absolutely. First one was around staffing. So the question was, finding the right team has been a bit of a struggle for our building. The talent pool in our area isn't that great. It's just difficult to find really good people. How do we deal with that?
Team, anyone want to jump in first?
So I think a couple of things, right? I think what we do at First Service Residential to really kind of, home grow our staff into promotability opportunities. But I'd also say, they are a great resource for referrals. And so, incentives for referring, associates, friends, family, and, they're not going to refer friends and family if they're not satisfied with the organization and where they're heading with their own career. So I think it's really important to reach out to the team that's current in the building or current in the association that and really try and find like individuals that can work for the organization.
Susan, we've certainly seen in Florida a pinch for talent because there's been so much growth and development coming into our market that you can't possibly train or develop enough within the team. So you have to follow a dual path approach where you're developing internal talent to be able to grow and escalate their career while also attracting external talent to move into our industry to be able to meet the current demands in our area. So similar in that concept. Mark, Sean, anything you'd like to add there?
I think Susan nailed it. I don't have anything.
No,
Yeah.
it's a tight market for sure, especially when you're opening a new building and you're trying to staff, from the first staff member to the 20th. It's a process, but really it's networking, it's referrals, it's using all your resources.
And I'll also say, we tap into, especially in the high-rise market, we tap into hospitality all the time. And, there's just a very different individual who, serves in the hospitality environment that we feel is a great fit for us. And the HOA or the condominium side and multifamily side of managing employees is a little less hectic than the 24/7 hotel industry environment. So we have really good luck tapping into that market.
Yeah, we're certainly becoming a much more known industry, right? And so certainly we've seen a migration of hospitality talent come into our space. Ben,
Amy, if I can interject just for 1 second, I'm getting some messages from my colleagues in Ontario. HODA is not rolled out to all associations yet. It is coming. It's a slow rollout. So if you don't have HODA yet, it's coming.
great point. Good response, Sean. I saw another one come through that said, how do you balance visual upgrades versus needed structural repairs? That's a really good question.
I think you have to do the safety first. You got to make sure your fire system and your structure is sound first. That's going to be the number one. But curb appeal is very important. We did some data mining a few years ago for one of our budget seminars, and we found that this is just for single beds in Vancouver, 3 years ago, but for every 1 cent that was put into strata fees, which is their condo fees here in BC, had a result in $35,000 higher resale value. So it
Wow.
was a real big impact and just showed us that how important curb appeal is to keep your value moving up. But my advice is always going to be, you got to take care of the structure and safety first.
Yeah, we have it a little bit easier in Florida because the Florida legislature has literally said you must do this when it comes to structural stuff, right? So there's no more real allowance for people to choose visual improvements over the structural piece. So we have it a little bit easier in terms of that, but we're hoping that that it ultimately bleeds into other states so that it becomes more commonplace, that people are now more aware. You've got to address cabling needs. You've got to do certain checks to make sure that your building is sound. Most people just don't think of that, right? They just know that they get to enjoy the interior of their unit, not necessarily thinking about all the mechanics that go into supporting a healthy long-term building. Well, wonderful. I do think that we're getting close to the top of the hour, which means that we'll likely need to pause here. I certainly want to say thank you to our panelists so much for sharing your expertise and insight with us. To our attendees, thank you for joining. We hope you found the information helpful, and please be sure to review the benchmark report for more information. You can always reach out to your First Service Residential team for more discussion or further guidance, and we hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, Amy.
Thank
Thank
you
you.
all.
Amy.